Anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith. You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. If you've been brought up in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you were brought up in Denmark in the time of the Vikings, you'd be believing in Wotan and Thor. If you were brought up in classical Greece, you'd be believing in Zeus. If you were brought up in Central Africa, you'd be believing in the great Juju up the mountain. There's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which, by the sheerest accident, you happen to have been brought up, and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great Juju at the bottom of the sea?
Wow, that was pretty powerful, was it not? I guess I should put my hands up and surrender and say, hey, I was born here in the Christian West. That must mean that every single argument I heard for God's existence, no matter how good, is necessarily false. Now, excuse my sarcasm, but that is how I view this argument called the genetic fallacy, which Richard just used and we're going to review here shortly. That's how I see it, that it's absolutely absurd. And I'm going to give you in this video my reasons why I think it's absurd, or maybe I should tone it down a little bit, fallacious. Hi, my name's Todd, and welcome to Mission Millennial Z Alpha Generations, where we share the other side of the creation story with today's youth. Now, in this video, I'm going to cover three things. One, we're going to define what the genetic fallacy is. Two, we're going to review why it's inexcusable for top atheists to use this argument. For top atheists, they are without excuse. And I'll give you my reasons why, and I think you will agree. Even if you're an atheist, by the way, I think you'll agree that the genetic fallacy, if you think it through, is poor. That doesn't mean atheism's false just because there's poor arguments that atheists use, like Richard just did. But it doesn't prove atheism's false any more than us theists, when we use bad arguments, doesn't disprove theism. So we're going to review that, why it's inexcusable. And three, we're going to discuss how to defeat the genetic fallacy. So let's first review the video, and then we'll get into how to defeat it, how to refute it.
This is probably going to be the most simplest one for you to answer, but what if you're wrong?
Well, what if I'm wrong? I mean, anybody could be wrong. We could all be wrong about the flying spaghetti monster and the pink unicorn and the flying teapot. You happen to have been brought up, I would presume, in the Christian faith.
I must take a swipe at that, even though this is a side issue. What Richard just did is the classic straw man tactic. He said, hey, I could just as well be wrong on the flying spaghetti monster, the flying teapot, and you name it. I could just as be wrong on that. And it's sort of like putting the listener at a false dilemma. Oh, that's right. If I believe in theism, I'm sort of like believing in the flying spaghetti monster because there's no difference. Now, why couldn't, in all fairness, in the scientific method, so to speak, all fairness and openness, why not just represent what Christians, what theistic Christians or theists, there are theists who aren't Christian, what they actually believe? They believe that in answer to Leibniz's question, why is there something rather than nothing, they believe the answer is because a supernatural, unembodied mind brought something out of nothing. He created the universe and everything in it out of nothing. So why not represent it fairly? You know, this is a big pet peeve I have with atheists who do this, and it would be nice if they stopped doing that and just get to the issues that and represent us clearly and fairly, and then destroy it. If it's false, fine. Show why it's false. That's great. All right, let's get back to the video.
You know what it's like not to believe in a particular faith because you're not a Muslim, you're not a Hindu. Why aren't you a Hindu? Because you happen to have been brought up in America, not in India. If you've been brought up in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you were brought up in Denmark in the time of the Vikings, you'd be believing in Wotan and Thor. If you were brought up in classical Greece, you'd be believing in Zeus. If you were brought up in Central Africa, you'd be believing in the great Juju up the mountain. There's no particular reason to pick on the Judeo-Christian God in which by the sheerest accident you happen to have been brought up, and ask me the question, what if I'm wrong? What if you're wrong about the great Juju at the bottom of the sea?
You know, the crowd, this just shows you the power of personality. Just look at the crowd just going crazy, practically giving him a standing ovation for his argument. One of the most fallacious arguments of all time, the genetic fallacy. How could I know? What if Richard had slipped up and said, what if you were born in Saudi Arabia? You'd be a Muslim. What if you were born in the Soviet Union or communist China? You would be an atheist. Then the realization would hit him. Where someone's born has no effect on what they believe, per se. It doesn't disprove if they're born, regardless of where they're born, it doesn't disprove what they're believing. So that is, to me, it's fantastic that someone can make that error. And what makes it inexcusable is that Richard Dawkins has a lot of power. He's the most famous atheist out there. And he wrote this book called The God Delusion. He believes God is a delusion. He has a lot of power over people. Just listen to how all those people clap for that bogus argument. It's very, very disconcerting when you see that. And this is why it's without excuse, because he knows better. This man is highly educated. He's heard what I'm saying before about the genetic fallacy. This is not, if he were to stumble over my video from a club theist, so to speak, if he were to stumble over my video, he wouldn't say, wow, I never heard that before. He knows it. So this is why it's inexcusable. And this is why I think it's inexcusable for any atheist to use this genetic fallacy argument. If I became an atheist tomorrow, I wouldn't use it. There's a number of arguments I wouldn't use if I was an atheist. And there are arguments theists use that they shouldn't use either. But that's not the subject of this video. So let's look at the definition of the genetic fallacy, and this will help us to recognize it and refute it. The genetic fallacy is a logical fallacy that occurs when someone judges an argument based on its origin instead of its content. It is also, and that's my point, that we should judge an argument based on its content, not its origin, like Richard just did. It is also known as the fallacy of origins, the fallacy of virtue. Now here's their explanation. The genetic fallacy occurs when someone dismisses or accepts an argument based on its source rather than its merits. It's a type of fallacy of relevance or red herring fallacy. Now I'm going to come back to the word red herring because this is what I think Richard is doing, whether consciously or not. He's throwing out a red herring to distract from the real issue, the explanatory issues that he has to prove. All right, let's go on. The genetic fallacy can occur when someone confuses reasons with causes or psychological explanations with logical explanations. The genetic fallacy can lead to flawed reasoning and conclusions. Example, they give a couple good examples. The Nazis were the first to research passive smoking and prohibit smoking in public. Therefore, a smoking ban is unacceptable. If someone was born in Saudi Arabia, they would be a Muslim by nature of where they were born. Genetic fallacy. How to avoid the genetic fallacy. Focus on the evidence and reasoning presented in the argument. And this is my plea. Focus on the reasoning. Don't use these red herring distractions of genetic fallacies or other definitional gameplays, that people do, atheists often do, by defining atheism to mean we don't need to prove anything, only you need to prove anything, we're just without knowledge of arguments for God, or whatever it is. These are red herrings. They don't really get to the issue or the issues that stand between us. Evaluate the content and evidence provided within the claim itself. Don't overlook valid arguments or ideas simply because of their origin. So, why then, when you have a lot of good arguments for something, if you supposedly do, why would you use such an argument as the genetic fallacy? Why would you commit that fallacy, that shortcoming? Why would you have to resort to that type of argumentation? Well, I think one of the reasons could be is that you rather not have to give an account for what you actually believe. So you sort of distract with superfluous arguments. And here's what I mean. This is what Richard Dawkins actually believes. Now look, I'm quoting him. I'm not misrepresenting him. I'm quoting what he and other atheists believe. Most atheists, majority of atheists, top atheists believe what I'm about to read to you. The fact, Richard says, that life evolved out of nearly nothing some 10 billion years after the universe evolved out of literally nothing is a fact so staggering I'd be mad to attempt words to do it justice. Would you want to have to defend the proposition that everything we see evolved out of literally nothing? Now, that is a tall order. We know of no other parallel in human history, period, where something mysteriously pops into existence out of literally nothing. That means the absence of anything. It could be possible that the reason why Richard and other top atheists use this inexcusable genetic fallacy argument is because they really don't have much evidence for what they believe, objective evidence. So they have to use red herring type of arguments. And that's sad. And I know not all atheists do that. There are some very good atheist debaters out there. They don't partake in any of this stuff. So I'm appealing basically to my other friends out there, my club atheist friends. I'm appealing to you as a club theist to not use this argument. In the comment section, I really like to hear some of you comment on this. Do you really think this is a good argument? I'd be curious to hear what you have to say. I'd be surprised if you think Richard's argument was good. I'd be surprised if you say, yeah, I would have clapped, and I still do clap. I still do give him a standing ovation for that powerful oration that he gave. Hopefully not. Anyway, I hope you like this video. If you do, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and share this channel with others you think might be benefited by it. Thank you. We'll talk to you next time in the next video. Bye-bye.